Jack Turner stepped into the cold Seattle night, the rain pouring down like an unrelenting curtain. The city was alive with Christmas lights, but the warmth of the season felt distant to him. At 38, Jack had seen enough of the world to make him feel older than his years. A former Marine, he had fought battles that left more than just physical scars. The death of his wife and son in a car accident 2 years ago had shattered his heart. Since that night, the holidays had become a reminder of everything he had lost. The cold didn't bother him anymore. He had learned to embrace it like an old friend. He pulled the collar of his worn jacket higher, his hands stuffed in his pockets, and walked down the rainy streets, his boots splashing through the puddles. By his side was Thor, his faithful German shepherd, a dog as loyal as they come. Thor's coat was dark and sleek, his amber eyes alert as ever, scanning the surroundings with the precision of a soldier. It had been a rough year. Jack wasn't sure where he was going, but the streets of Seattle felt like the only place he could be. His life had been reduced to the quiet hum of solitude, punctuated only by the occasional memory of his wife's laugh or the warm touch of his son's hand. The world had kept moving, but Jack had been stuck. Thor, however, never stopped moving. The dog had been by his side through thick and thin, always offering the silent companionship that Jack couldn't find anywhere else. As they walked, the rain washed away the dust of his thoughts, but it did nothing to numb the ache in his chest. Jack looked around and saw a glowing neon sign in the distance, the Iron Anchor. It flickered against the rain, a sign of warmth and respite amidst the cold. Without thinking, he made his way towards the door. He could feel the weight of the world lifting, even if just for a moment, as he pulled it open and stepped inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the cold streets. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting soft light across the polished floors. The clink of fine silverware and quiet conversations filled the room. It was an expensive place, out of Jack's league, but tonight, he didn't care. He just needed a moment to escape the storm outside. But as soon as they entered, everything stopped. The warmth of the room seemed to evaporate the moment Jack walked in. The manager, a slender man in a sharp suit, turned his head sharply, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the mud-covered dog. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager said, his voice cold and clipped. "We don't allow animals here." Jack nodded, a mix of frustration and shame bubbling up inside him. Thor stood at his side, unaware of the discomfort they were causing. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the manager raised his hand. "Please, leave," he ordered, his gaze flicking disdainfully to Thor's muddy paws. For a moment, Jack hesitated. He had been through enough in his life to know when to fight and when to walk away, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the weight of the holidays, or maybe it was the weight of everything he had been carrying for so long. He felt his temper rise. "Just a bowl of water," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "That's all we need. We'll leave after that." The manager's expression didn't change. "I said leave, now." Jack clenched his jaw, but it was Thor who broke the silence. The German shepherd, sensing the tension, took a few steps forward, his presence silent but commanding. Thor's dark eyes locked onto the manager's, a quiet defiance in his gaze. The tension hung in the air like a storm, but before Jack could react, he felt something, a presence, something different from the hostility he was used to. It came from the back corner of the room. A pair of steel blue eyes were watching them from the shadows. For a moment, Jack hesitated. He had been through enough in his life to know when to fight and when to walk away, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the weight of the holidays, or maybe it was the weight of everything he had been carrying for so long. He felt his temper rise. "Just a bowl of water," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "That's all we need. We'll leave after that." The manager's expression didn't change. "I said leave, now." Jack clenched his jaw, but it was Thor who broke the silence. The German shepherd, sensing the tension, took a few steps forward, his presence silent but commanding. Thor's dark eyes locked onto the manager's, a quiet defiance in his gaze. The tension hung in the air like a storm. But before Jack could react, he felt something. A presence, something different from the hostility he was used to. It came from the back corner of the room. A pair of steel blue eyes were watching them from the shadows. The manager, oblivious to the shift in energy, was about to speak again when suddenly the quiet hum of the room was broken by the sound of footsteps. Jack's eyes flicked to the corner where the eyes had been watching him, and he saw the figure now emerging from the dim light. The man in the wheelchair was an imposing sight, even from across the room. Silas Vance, a billionaire, a name Jack had heard more than once but never met. The man had wealth, power, and a presence that was hard to ignore even in a place as exclusive as this. But it wasn't just his fortune that commanded attention, it was his aura, something about him that felt different. Thor, who had been standing still, suddenly moved. The dog ignored the manager and took slow, deliberate steps toward Silas, as if drawn by an invisible force. The air seemed to hum with the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Jack watched in disbelief as Thor, without hesitation, walked across the polished floor, his claws clicking with each step. He passed by startled diners, the silence in the room thickening with each of Thor's movements. No one dared to stop the dog, or even raise their voices. It was as if they too could feel the gravity of the moment. Thor reached Silas's table, where the elderly man sat silently in his wheelchair, his hands resting on the armrests. For a moment Silas said nothing, but the intensity of his gaze was unmistakable. He looked at the dog with an odd mixture of curiosity and something else, something deeper, like recognition. Thor stood in front of him, unmoving for a second, then gently placed his head on Silas's knee. The gesture was simple but filled with an unspoken understanding, a silent offer of warmth. In that instant, something shifted in the room. Silas felt the weight of the dog's head on his leg, and something in him stirred. It wasn't just the pressure of Thor's head, it was the warmth, the connection, something alive that he hadn't felt in years. It was like the dog's touch broke through the walls he had built around himself. For the first time in years, Silas felt the warmth of life return, a feeling that had long eluded him since the accident that had left him paralyzed. A lump formed in his throat. The tears, unexpected and foreign, welled up in his eyes as memories rushed back. He hadn't felt this much emotion in so long. The dog's presence, so silent and understanding, stirred a quiet wave of grief that he thought had long been buried. Silas let the tears fall, unashamed, feeling the sting of loss, but also the unexpected comfort of something he hadn't realized he needed: connection. Jack stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before him. He had expected many things when he walked into the restaurant, but this was different. Something unspoken passed between the man and the dog. Thor wasn't just a dog, he was a bridge between past pains and the possibility of healing. The manager, flustered and clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding scene, stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Sir, you can't—" But Silas, his eyes still locked on Thor, raised a hand. His voice, though soft, cut through the tension. "It's fine." Jack wasn't sure what had just happened, but he felt it. The weight of Silas's acceptance of his presence, and most of all, the recognition of what Thor had brought to him. It was as if the dog had known exactly what Silas needed, even before Silas himself knew. As the weight of Thor's head rested on his knee, Silas felt something shift deep inside him. The warmth of the dog, the gentle pressure on his leg, it wasn't just a comfort, it was a reminder of a time long past, a time when he felt alive and full of purpose. The sharp edges of his memory began to soften, and the walls he had built around himself for years seemed to crack just a little. A lump formed in Silas's throat as he stared at the dark fur of the dog. The world around him faded as memories flooded in. Memories from another life, a life that had almost been forgotten. The smells of sand and dust, the scorching heat of the desert, and the deafening noise of battle. He could see his comrades. Their faces burned into his mind as clearly as if they were standing right in front of him. Silas remembered the first time he had been deployed, young and full of ambition. His eyes had been wide with determination, eager to prove himself. He remembered Toby, his closest friend in the field, a man who had shared his life in the trenches, their bond forged by fire and blood. Toby had been the one who had pulled him out of the wreckage after the explosion. The same explosion that had left him paralyzed, the same explosion that had taken Toby's life. He felt his chest tighten at the thought. He had never allowed himself to mourn properly. He couldn't. There had been no time. They were at war. Every moment had been a struggle for survival, and emotions had to be buried deep down, out of sight, out of mind. But now, as he sat in this fine dining restaurant feeling the weight of Thor's gentle presence, something broke. Thor, this magnificent creature, was not just a dog. Silas realized now that the dog had somehow rekindled a connection he hadn't even known he needed. Thor was reminding him of Toby. The loyalty, the trust, the sense of duty. He had been a soldier once, standing side by side with men like Toby, fighting for survival, for honor, and for each other. The bond they shared had been unspoken, but it had been deep. The dog's eyes, full of understanding and wisdom, seemed to look right into his soul, as if it knew his pain. It wasn't just a look of concern, but a shared sense of something more. Thor wasn't just here for Jack, he was here for Silas too, reminding him that not all bonds were lost, that not all love faded away with time. The emotions that Silas had kept locked away for so long began to rise, breaking through the dam of years of self-imposed isolation. Toby's face flashed before his eyes, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the depth of the loss. The grief was sharp, but it was also liberating. He hadn't allowed himself to grieve in so long. But tonight, the dog had unlocked something inside him. Jack, still standing there, watched the old man closely, sensing the change in Silas. He had no idea what was happening, but he could feel the shift, the way the tension had softened, the way Silas's rigid posture had loosened, even if just slightly. Jack had no words for it, but he knew that something significant was happening. He couldn't explain it, but Thor had done something. The dog had sparked a memory, a realization that the wounds from the past could be healed, if only he allowed himself to feel again. Silas's hand trembled as he reached down to scratch behind Thor's ears, his voice barely a whisper. "You're not just a dog, are you?" he murmured. Thor didn't respond in any way that words could describe, but the warmth in the old man's eyes spoke volumes. For the first time in a long while, Silas felt the weight of his past lifting just a little. And that small shift was enough to make him believe, if only for a moment, that healing was possible. The moments passed quietly, the tension that had once gripped the restaurant now dissipating. Jack stood there watching Silas closely as the old man continued to pet Thor, his fingers brushing gently through the dog's thick coat. There was something about the calmness of that moment, something that was almost sacred. Jack could feel the shift in the air, the weight of years of pent-up pain being momentarily lifted. After a few moments, Silas finally broke the silence. His voice was rough, strained, but it carried a depth of emotion that Jack hadn't expected from the stoic man. I don't know what it is about him," Silas said softly, his gaze still fixed on Thor. "But this dog, he makes me remember things I haven't thought about in years." Jack nodded, sensing the change, but unsure how to respond. The two of them stood in the moment, letting the warmth of Thor's presence settle around them. Silas turned his gaze to Jack, his steel blue eyes still clouded with a mix of confusion and wonder. "I've been living in the shadows for so long. I forgot what it felt like to feel something real, something that wasn't just grief or regret." Jack paused. For a moment, he didn't know how to answer. What could he say to a man who had lived so much, seen so much, yet carried a burden so heavy? But something in Silas's expression made him speak, made him share more than he usually would. "I know the feeling," Jack said, his voice quiet but steady. "I was a Marine, been through more than my share of wars, but the hardest fight was always after. When the battle's over, when everyone else goes home, and you're left with the memories." Jack shifted, his gaze falling to the floor for a moment as if searching for the right words. 2 years ago, I lost my wife and son in a car crash. It's like the life I had ended that day. I've been walking through this world, but I'm not really here. Not until I met Thor. Silas's eyes softened as he looked at Jack, understanding flickering in his gaze. I'm sorry, he said, his voice low. I can't imagine what you must have gone through. Jack shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. There's no easy way to explain it. You just keep moving, even when it doesn't feel like it's worth it anymore. He looked down at Thor, whose amber eyes met his with that same unwavering trust, as if telling him without words that he was not alone. Jack sighed. It's funny, you know. I never thought I'd find any kind of peace after what happened, but this dog, he's been a constant, a reminder that I'm not entirely lost. Silas was silent for a moment, processing Jack's words, and then he spoke again, his voice barely more than a whisper. You've lost everything, and yet you still have something to give. You're not broken, Jack. You've just been through things that most people can't even begin to understand. Jack looked up, meeting Silas's eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not just as a man burdened with grief, but as someone who still had value. Someone who still had something to offer. And then, without thinking, he added, maybe that's what Thor is here for, to remind us that we're not done yet. Silas glanced down at the dog again, the weight of his own thoughts pressing in. He's more than just a reminder. He's a bridge back to something better. Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Maybe he's not just here for us, Silas. Maybe he's here to remind us that there's still more to give, more to live for. Silas looked at Jack, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. It was small, but it was real. Maybe we'll see that together. The bond between the two men had formed silently, effortlessly, as if Thor had been the catalyst they both needed. They were two soldiers, each carrying their own burdens, but for the first time in years, they weren't carrying them alone. The conversation between Jack and Silas lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken truths and shared understanding. Thor lay quietly at their feet, as if sensing the weight of the moment, his eyes shifting between the two men. The warmth in the room had softened the sharp edges of their pasts, but the wounds remained. Jack, however, wasn't ready to walk away from them just yet. He took a deep breath, his chest tightening, and turned his gaze to the floor. His voice was steady, but there was a quiet sadness in it. I don't think I've ever really talked about it, not the way it hurts. Losing Sarah and Eli, I mean. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. After the accident, everything felt like it just stopped. It wasn't just them I lost, it was myself. I couldn't take care of them. I couldn't be there when they needed me. That's the part that gets me. I could have done more. I should have done more. Jack's hands curled into fists, the memories of the accident still vivid in his mind. The sound of tires screeching, the crash, and the chaos that followed. He had been driving that night, and he had promised Sarah he would always be there. But in the end, he hadn't been able to protect them. The guilt was suffocating. I've been walking around with that weight ever since, Jack continued, his voice quieter now. It's like I'm living, but I'm not really alive. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for not being there when they needed me the most. Silas listened intently, his eyes focused on Jack, as though absorbing the pain in his words. He had never known the extent of Jack's grief, but he could feel it now, raw and unrelenting. When Jack finished, Silas sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping the armrest in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Silas understood, perhaps better than anyone, the weight of loss. Jack, Silas said softly, his voice deep and worn from years of holding back. I understand more than you might think. I know what it's like to lose everything and not know how to move forward. He paused for a moment, his gaze shifting to the window where the rain continued to pour outside. I lost my family too. I didn't lose them in the same way you did, but I lost them just the same. My daughter, Emily, she's out there and I haven't seen her in years. Silas's voice cracked for the first time. He cleared his throat, a visible sign of his struggle to hold back emotions he had buried for too long. After the war, after everything built, I didn't know how to connect with her anymore. I focused on the empire I was building, thinking I was doing it all for her. But I was wrong. I pushed her away when she needed me most. And now, I can't go back. I can't undo the years of silence. The pain in Silas's words was palpable. Jack could feel the weight of the regret in the air, a shared understanding passing between them. Both of them had lost something crucial in their lives: family, connection, love, and it seemed that despite their differences, they were bound by the same sorrow. You think you can fix things, that you can move forward, but sometimes I wonder if it's too late. Silas continued, his voice heavy with the burden of years of regret. I spent so many years fighting battles, both on the field and in the boardroom, but I couldn't fight the one battle that mattered most. And now I'm left with a lifetime of missed opportunities. There was a long pause before Silas spoke again, this time his voice softer, more resigned. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe it's just about taking the first step. Maybe it's about opening the door again. I don't know if Emily will ever forgive me, but I have to try. Jack looked at him, and for the first time he didn't see just the billionaire businessman or the man who had built an empire. He saw a father, a man struggling with the same pain he himself carried. We can't change the past, Silas, Jack said quietly, but we can still try to make things right. Maybe it's not about fixing everything, but just showing up for the people who matter. Silas met Jack's gaze, and in that moment the bond between them grew even stronger. They weren't just two men with broken pasts. They were two men who had found a way to connect, to find healing, and to start the process of mending what had been lost. Maybe you're right, Silas said, his voice more hopeful now. Maybe it's time to try again. The evening was still thick with the weight of their conversation, but as the rain continued to fall outside, a quiet sense of clarity settled between Jack and Silas. It was as if the storm had washed away the heaviness of years spent in isolation. The restaurant had emptied, the guests long gone, leaving only the two men and the dog who had, in a way, brought them together. Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window where the rain lashed against the glass. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to find anything, much less someone, on this lonely Christmas Eve. But here he was, sitting with a man who had lived a life of privilege and yet was just as burdened by regret and loss as he was. The silence lingered between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of understanding, of two people who had walked different paths but somehow found themselves on the same road now. I've been thinking, Jack said, breaking the quiet. His voice was steady, but there was a new resolve in it. Maybe this is the time to stop running. I don't have anything left to go back to. And maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. Silas looked at him, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. You mean here? In Seattle? Jack nodded. Yeah, I've been moving around for too long, trying to outrun everything, but it's catching up with me. Maybe it's time I stayed. Maybe it's time I did something that matters. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I can try. The words hung in the air, and for a moment Silas didn't speak. He looked down at Thor, who was now lying peacefully at their feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. It was as if the dog knew the gravity of the moment, as if it understood that the bonds between the three of them were just beginning to form. You know, Silas began, his voice softer now, I've been thinking about something too. He took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. I have a project. Something I've been working on for a while, but I haven't had the right person to help me with it. It's about veterans, guys like you and me, men and women who fought for their country but came home to nothing, to streets that didn't welcome them. I want to build something for them, a place where they can find help, find a future. Jack listened intently, his curiosity piqued. A shelter? He asked. Not just a shelter, Silas replied, a hint of determination in his voice. A community, a place where they can feel needed again, a place where they can find purpose. I've got the money, but I need someone to help lead it. Someone who understands what it's like to be broken, someone who knows how to rebuild. Jack's mind raced, and for the first time in years he felt a spark of something more than just survival. Thor, sensing the shift, raised his head and looked between the two men, his amber eyes filled with quiet understanding. I think I'm the one you've been waiting for, Jack said, his voice filled with a new sense of certainty. I don't have the answers, but I know I can help. And maybe this is the thing that's going to pull me out of the darkness. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. Silas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. It was the first real smile Jack had seen from him. Then it's settled. We'll build this together. And just like that, the night that had begun with so much tension and pain ended with the quiet promise of something new. The two men, broken in their own ways, had found a purpose together. And Thor, the dog who had quietly bridged the gap between their worlds, lay at their feet, as if to say, "This is where we start again." As the evening wore on, the weight of the decision to move forward with the project began to settle in. The storm outside had not let up, and the steady rhythm of rain against the windows seemed to echo the beating of Jack's heart. He had made a choice, and for the first time in a long while it felt like the right one. But just as the quiet promise of something new began to take root, Silas's expression shifted. The warmth in his eyes faded slightly as he leaned back in his chair, his fingers absently stroking Thor's fur. The dog, ever watchful, had not moved since the moment Silas had agreed to their plan. Jack could feel the tension in the room rising again, but this time, it wasn't from uncertainty about the project. It was something else, something heavier. "I think it's time you know a little more about me," Silas said. His voice quieter now, laced with something Jack hadn't expected. Regret. Jack looked at him, his curiosity piqued. He hadn't realized there was more to Silas's story, but then again, he had only just begun to scratch the surface of the man sitting before him. "I've spent most of my life building my company," Silas continued, his gaze far away. "The Vance Corporation was everything to me. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what truly mattered. The company became my world. I was consumed by it, by the power, the prestige, and in doing so I pushed everyone away, my family, my daughter." Jack remained silent, listening carefully, understanding that there was much more beneath the surface. "The thing about power," Silas said, his voice growing more somber, "is that it blinds you. You start to believe that everything you do is for the greater good. But the truth is, it's for you. It's about keeping what you've built. And in the process, you lose the very things that made you who you are." Silas paused, his hand shaking slightly as he looked at the remnants of his former empire outside the window. The rain had slowed, but the storm inside him was far from over. "When I was building my empire, I didn't see what it was costing me. My daughter, Emily, she needed me. But I was too focused on my own success. I thought I was providing for her, that I was giving her the best life I could offer, but I was wrong. I shut her out, and when she left, I lost everything." Jack could hear the depth of pain in Silas's words, and for the first time he saw the man not as the successful businessman, but as a father, one who had failed the most important relationship in his life. "And now," Silas continued, his voice breaking, "I'm trying to fix it, trying to make up for the years I lost, but the damage is done." Jack's heart ached for him. He knew what it was like to feel like you had nothing left to give, to believe that the past was a wall that couldn't be scaled. But here, in the quiet of the room, with Thor by their side, there was a glimmer of hope. "And this project," Silas said, glancing at Jack, "it's not just about helping veterans. It's about redemption, about giving something back before it's too late." Thor, sensing the shift in the conversation, moved closer to Silas, resting his head on the billionaire's lap once again. His presence was a steady reminder of the loyalty and unconditional love that could still be found even in the most broken places. Jack watched the dog, amazed at how Thor seemed to understand everything without a single word being said. The dog was not just a companion, he was the link that connected them all, the reminder that even in the midst of their pain, they weren't truly alone. "We'll do this together, Silas," Jack said, his voice firm. "We'll build this place, for the veterans, for us, and for the ones we've lost." Silas's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "I think that's the first thing I've truly believed in a long time." The storm outside had calmed, but the storm within Silas seemed far from over. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a reason to continue moving forward. And with Thor by his side, maybe redemption was not as far away as he had once thought. The calm after the storm was short-lived. Silas had found a renewed sense of purpose, and Jack was beginning to believe in the possibility of redemption. Yet as the days passed, an unexpected storm began to brew. Not in the weather, but in the business world. Julian Thorne, the CFO of the Vance Corporation, was not one to accept defeat. From the moment Silas had proposed his project for veterans, Julian had been watching from the sidelines, biding his time. Now, his patience was running thin. The idea of a shelter for veterans, a project that might pull the rug out from under his company's luxurious business ventures, was something he couldn't let slide. Jack could feel the tension in the air the moment Julian stepped into the room, his sharp suit and arrogant demeanor as cold as ever. Julian had always seen the world as a set of calculations, profits, and losses to be measured, manipulated, and controlled. This new project, however, threatened to disrupt his carefully curated empire. Silas, who had once been the powerhouse behind the company, now seemed like a shadow of the man he used to be. Julian was determined to use this to his advantage. "I've been reviewing the numbers, Silas," Julian said, his voice smooth and cutting. He stood at the head of the conference table, flipping through a stack of papers as if he were discussing an insignificant matter. "And frankly, I don't see how this project will generate any real revenue. It's a charity project, and charity doesn't exactly make the kind of profit we're used to." Jack, sitting across from him, could feel the edge of Julian's words, the subtle threat beneath them. He had already sensed Julian's disapproval of the project, but now it was clear that Julian wasn't just voicing an opinion, he was making his move. "You're not seeing the bigger picture, Julian," Silas replied, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of tension. "This isn't just about money, it's about giving something back. You've spent years building wealth, but you've never had to rebuild yourself, rebuild purpose. This project is my way of making amends for the things I've lost, and it's not up for discussion." Julian's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone who was no longer in control of his own company. "I disagree, Silas," he said coldly. "You've built an empire, yes, but now it's time for you to step aside. Your judgment is clouded by sentiment. This project could damage the company, and if you can't see that, then perhaps it's time for someone else to take the reins." The words hung in the air, thick with the threat of what was to come. Jack could see the old spark in Silas's eyes, the fire that had once driven him to build the empire that Julian now sought to control, but it was clear to Jack that Silas's control was slipping. The power had shifted, and now Julian wanted to take it all. "Are you threatening me, Julian?" Silas asked, his tone deceptively calm. He wasn't easily intimidated, but Jack could feel the tension rise between them. This was no longer just a conversation, it was a confrontation. Julian's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm simply pointing out the facts. You've got a choice to make, Silas. Either you back down, or we'll let the board decide. If you can't see the risk, then it's time to put the company's future in capable hands." Silas stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I won't back down," he said firmly, his voice rising with quiet authority. "This project will move forward. And if you're not on board with that, then I suggest you start looking for another job." The air between them crackled with animosity, the battle lines drawn. Jack could feel the weight of the moment. Silas wasn't backing down, but neither was Julian. The corporate war had begun, and it was clear that Julian Thorne would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Thor, sensing the rising tension, growled lowly at the back of the room, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the resolve of his companion. Silas and Julian locked eyes, neither willing to show weakness. The room was filled with the silence of two powerful forces on the brink of a collision. The tension in the room lingered long after Julian's departure, leaving Jack with an unsettling sense of what was to come. The weight of the corporate battle between Silas and Julian had only just begun to make itself known, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't limited to the boardroom. As the project moved forward, Jack found himself facing more than just opposition from Julian. He had to contend with the voices of doubt coming from all corners, those closest to Silas, and even Silas's own family. In the days that followed, the fallout from Julian's challenge rippled through the Vance Corporation. Jack had always known that his involvement in the project would not be met with universal approval, but the weight of the resistance he faced was starting to feel overwhelming. The team that Silas had assembled for the veterans shelter was divided. Some supported Jack's vision for the project, others sided with the established order that Julian represented. Maria, the tough ex-Army combat engineer who had become Jack's closest ally on the project, stood firm beside him. But others on the team questioned whether they were truly in the right direction. Doc Miller, the grizzled veteran with a penchant for dry humor, had hinted that Silas's dream of redemption might not be as practical as it seemed. "Sometimes you can't save everyone, Jack," Doc had said quietly one afternoon, his voice rough from years of battlefield experience. "This project might save a few, but you can't force people to change if they don't want it." The words hung in the air, a reminder of the difficulties ahead. Jack understood the skepticism. There were people who had been broken by the system, and not all of them were ready to be healed. But what hurt the most was when Silas's daughter Emily came to the site. She had always been distant, but now she seemed almost openly critical. The coldness in her eyes when she looked at Jack stung more than he'd expected. "I don't see how this is going to work," Emily had said, shaking her head as she surveyed the construction site. "My father's been holding on to this idea for too long. You're getting caught up in something that's already doomed." The words hit Jack harder than they should have. Emily had lived through the pain of being neglected by Silas, but in that moment, she seemed to carry the weight of all the doubts Jack had buried in his heart. She was no different from the other skeptics who questioned the worth of this project. She, too, was unsure if her father's dream would ever become a reality. It was then that Thor stepped in, his presence like a steady hand on Jack's shoulder. As Jack stood there trying to process Emily's words, Thor nudged him gently, his warm amber eyes meeting Jack's with unspoken understanding. Thor had been with him through everything, through the battles, the losses, and now the uncertainty that lay ahead. It was as if the dog knew that Jack needed to be reminded that he wasn't alone, even when the world around him felt like it was slipping through his fingers. With a deep breath, Jack reached down and scratched behind Thor's ears, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm not giving up, boy," he whispered. "We're doing this, no matter what they say." The dog let out a low, contented sigh as if to affirm Jack's resolve. It wasn't just about the project. It was about proving to himself and to the people around him that he could build something meaningful, that he could still stand tall, even when everyone seemed to doubt him. The challenges from those around him were only the beginning, but Thor's loyalty and the quiet support from his old friend Silas kept him grounded. There was no turning back now. The first signs of Julian's treachery appeared quietly, almost imperceptibly, but as the days passed, Jack and Silas began to see the patterns, the subtle manipulations that threatened to undo everything they had worked for. Julian's attempts to derail the project were no longer covert whispers in board meetings or passive-aggressive remarks. No, now he was coming for them head-on. Jack had always been a fighter. His military training had taught him to look for threats before they struck, to always be 2 steps ahead. But even he didn't expect the financial sabotage Julian was setting into motion. It wasn't just about undermining Silas's project for the veterans. It was about something much bigger. Julian had plans to collapse the entire foundation of Silas's company using their own business tactics against them. At first, it started with small, seemingly innocent mistakes. discrepancies in the budget reports, unexpected withdrawals from company funds, and an influx of unapproved expenses that didn't make sense. Silas, who had always trusted Julian's expertise in managing the financial side of things, was blindsided. It wasn't until Jack dug into the numbers that the full scope of Julian's plan became clear. "Silas, we're being played," Jack said one afternoon as they sat together, going over the latest financial report. His brow furrowed as he pointed out a pattern of suspicious transactions that led straight to Julian's department. Silas looked over the report, his sharp eyes scanning each line. His face tightened with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "You're telling me Julian's behind this?" Jack nodded. "It's too clean to be anything else. He's making sure the project fails, on paper. Every financial report shows losses, but when I dug deeper, I found that someone is funneling money into accounts we didn't authorize." Silas's face darkened. "I should have seen this coming. I knew he wanted more control, but this is beyond greed. He's playing a dangerous game." Jack looked at Silas, understanding the weight of the situation. Julian wasn't just challenging them financially, he was trying to destroy everything Silas had built. Every piece of progress, every effort to help those veterans was at risk. "I thought he was just a money guy," Jack muttered. "But now I see. He's much more dangerous than that. He's trying to take us down from the inside out. He's been planning this for months." The realization hit Jack hard. It wasn't just about the project anymore. They weren't only fighting against the lack of resources or the skepticism of others. Now they had a powerful adversary inside their own ranks, someone who had all the leverage and none of the morality. They were up against a man who would stop at nothing to gain power, even if it meant ruining the lives of those who had trusted him. Silas clenched his fists, his voice cold. "This ends now. We can't afford to let him succeed. This project is too important. We've already lost too much. My family, my future. I won't lose this too." Jack stood up, determination in his eyes. "We'll fight him together. We'll expose him, and we'll make sure he doesn't get away with this." For the first time in a long while, Silas looked at Jack, truly seeing him, not just the former soldier who had come to work on a project, but the man who had been through his own battles and now stood by his side in this one. And then there was Thor, who had not moved from his spot beside Jack. The dog seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, his eyes alert and focused, as if preparing for the next fight. "We've got a war ahead of us, but it's not one we'll lose," Jack said, looking at Silas. "We'll expose Julian. We'll get the evidence we need to show him for who he really is." Silas nodded, his resolve hardening. "Let's do it. We'll take the fight to him before he can take us down." The days following their confrontation with Julian were filled with uncertainty. Jack and Silas worked tirelessly, poring over financial documents, making phone calls, and collecting evidence. They knew what they were up against. Julian Thorne was ruthless, and he had no intention of letting the project for the veterans succeed. The clock was ticking, and the weight of their fight against him grew heavier with each passing day. Then the worst happened. A sudden and unexpected announcement hit the media. Vance Corporation was facing a massive financial crisis. Reports of embezzlement, mismanagement, and fraudulent transactions began to circulate. The company's stock prices plummeted, and the board members were in a panic. Silas had worked his whole life to build the corporation, and now it was slipping through his fingers. The news was a blow to both Silas and Jack. Everything they had fought for, the veterans' shelter, the future they were building, was at risk. Julian, it seemed, had struck the first blow in a war he intended to win. The project was now on the verge of collapse, the money drying up, the investors pulling out. In the midst of it all, Silas remained silent for a moment, staring at the reports in front of him. He had fought countless battles in his life, but this one felt different. His body was failing him. The years of stress and illness had taken their toll. His hands shook as he gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, and the pain in his chest was growing worse. But despite his weakening body, Silas's resolve had not faltered. He looked at Jack, his eyes burning with determination. "This isn't over," Silas said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "Julian thinks he can take everything from me. He thinks he can bury us, but I won't let him. Not after everything we've done, not after everything we fought for. Jack nodded, his mind working quickly, processing the situation. The project could still be salvaged, but it would require more than just evidence of Julian's wrongdoings. They needed to strike fast, take control of the narrative, and expose Julian for what he truly was: greedy, power-hungry, and willing to destroy everything in his path for his own gain. We need to act quickly, Silas. If we don't, Julian will turn the board against us, and this project will be over before it even begins. Silas's gaze hardened as he looked out the window at the rain-soaked city. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside him. Julian's manipulation was far-reaching, and Silas could feel his grip tightening on everything he had worked so hard to build. But for the first time in a long while, something stirred within him, a sense of purpose. "Get the legal team on it," Silas ordered, his voice firm. "We'll expose Julian for what he's done. He's not going to walk away from this unscathed." Thor, who had been lying at Silas's feet, lifted his head at the sound of his master's voice. The dog's amber eyes met Silas's, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Thor's presence was a steady reminder that despite the chaos surrounding them, there was still loyalty, there was still love. Silas smiled faintly, his hand reaching down to stroke Thor's fur. "We're not done yet, boy. We'll fight until the end." But despite the strength in his words, Silas couldn't ignore the toll his body was taking. His chest tightened, and the familiar ache in his legs returned, a constant reminder of the frailty of his body. Jack could see the strain in Silas's face, but he didn't speak about it. The old man had made up his mind. There would be no backing down. With a final nod, Jack stood. "Let's do it. Let's bring Julian down." The days following their decision to fight Julian were filled with frantic action as Jack and Silas rallied the legal team and made plans to expose the corruption within the company. But amid the chaos of the corporate battle, another, more personal war began to unfold, a war that Silas had avoided for years, but one he could no longer run from. Silas had been distant from his daughter Emily for so long that the idea of reaching out felt foreign to him. The last time they had spoken was when she had left for college, a tearful farewell that had been overshadowed by the demands of his career. Over the years, Silas had justified his absence, telling himself that he was doing it all for her, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had built an empire, but in doing so, he had lost the most important thing, his connection to the people who mattered most. Emily was one of them. As the weight of the past continued to press down on him, Silas realized that he couldn't let this project be his only chance at redemption. He needed to reconnect with his daughter, to find a way to make up for the years of silence. He couldn't do it alone, but maybe, just maybe, this was the right moment. One evening, after another long day of strategizing and gathering evidence against Julian, Silas sat quietly in his office, staring at the phone in his hand. Emily's number had been tucked away in a drawer for years, and now he found himself about to dial it. His fingers hovered over the buttons, uncertainty clouding his mind. "What if she doesn't want to hear from me?" Silas muttered under his breath, the old doubts creeping in. He had built so many walls over the years, both in his personal life and within the company. Could they be torn down? Could Emily find it in her heart to forgive him? He glanced over at Thor, who was lying beside him, sensing his unease. The dog's amber eyes met Silas's, and for a moment the weight of his loneliness seemed less suffocating. Thor had never left his side, had never asked for forgiveness, and yet had given Silas more than anyone ever had, a reminder of the loyalty and love that could still exist, even in the most broken hearts. Taking a deep breath, Silas pressed the call button. The phone rang, each second stretching on longer than the last. When the call was answered, Silas's heart pounded in his chest. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was soft, unfamiliar, and yet so achingly familiar. "Emily." Silas's voice cracked, betraying the years of regret he had kept buried. "It's me, your father." There was a long pause, and for a moment Silas wondered if she would hang up. But then he heard a soft sigh, followed by a hesitant voice. "Dad, it's..." Been a long time. A lump formed in Silas's throat, but he swallowed it down. I know. Too long. I don't know where to start. I've made so many mistakes. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've been a terrible father. I've been so consumed by my work, by the company, that I pushed you away. And for that, I'm sorry. The silence on the other end of the line seemed to stretch for eternity, and Silas braced himself for the worst. But then Emily spoke again, her voice softer now. Dad, I've been angry for a long time. Angry that you were never there. But I never stopped caring. I just didn't know how to reach you. A tear slid down Silas's cheek as he listened to his daughter's words. For the first time in years, the walls around his heart seemed to crumble bit by bit. I never should have let you slip away, Silas said quietly. I've lost so much, and I don't want to lose you too. Another long pause. Then Emily's voice, thick with emotion, came through. I don't know if we can fix everything, but I'm willing to try. Maybe we can start by talking. For real. Silas's heart soared as he finally felt the tiniest spark of hope. Emily wasn't angry anymore. There was a chance for healing, a chance to rebuild the connection that had been lost. Thank you, Silas whispered, his voice cracking. We'll start, Emily. We'll start. As the days passed, the battle to keep Julian at bay intensified. Silas was feeling the weight of his choices, both the corporate and personal. The phone call with Emily had lifted a small weight from his heart, but it didn't erase the mounting pressures from all sides. His body, already weakened by years of stress and illness, seemed to be faltering at a faster pace. The pain in his chest had become sharper, his breathing more labored, and the exhaustion was now a constant companion. Still, Silas couldn't afford to give in to his body. Not now. Not when everything he had worked for was on the line. Jack and Thor were by his side, keeping the project alive, keeping his resolve steady. But deep down, Silas knew they were facing something much larger than just the financial sabotage. They were fighting for the future, for everything that had brought them here, and for the veterans who were depending on them. The fight against Julian had become a battle of wills. The latest confrontation came when Silas and Jack were summoned to a meeting with Julian. The tension was palpable as they walked into the sleek boardroom, the air thick with animosity. Julian was already seated at the head of the table, his sharp gaze flicking up to meet Silas and Jack as they entered. Sit down, Julian said coolly, motioning to the chairs across from him. There was no warmth in his tone, no courtesy, just business, and Silas could see the gleam of victory in Julian's eyes. The battle for control was far from over, but it was clear that Julian had plans of his own. Jack stood at Silas's side, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Julian's smug expression. He could feel the undercurrent of tension, the weight of the coming confrontation. Silas took his seat, his hands resting on the armrests of his wheelchair, the familiar aches in his body serving as a constant reminder of his fragility. I'm not here to waste time, Silas, Julian began, his voice smooth and cutting. You and your little project are a distraction. You've taken what's mine, what's ours. The company is slipping, and I'm giving you one final chance to walk away. Silas looked at him, his jaw clenched, the old fire rising in his chest. I'm not walking away, Julian. You've pushed too far this time. This project means more than just profits and losses. It's about something bigger. Bigger? Julian scoffed. You've become a relic of the past, Silas. This project, this dream of yours, is a liability, and I'm done letting you drag us all down with your nostalgia for what you lost. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You'll either step aside and let me take control, or I'll make sure you regret it. Silas's heart raced, the weight of Julian's words hitting harder than he expected. But this time, it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was something else, something he hadn't felt in years, defiance. You've underestimated me, Julian, Silas said, his voice firm, despite the tremor of pain in his chest. I've given you every chance, every opportunity to lead alongside me. But you've chosen greed over loyalty, power over people. This project isn't just my legacy, it's a promise to those who've been forgotten, just like I was. Julian's eyes flashed with irritation. "You're wasting your time. You'll lose. You've already lost. This company is mine and I'll have what's mine." The words hit harder than any physical blow. But Silas didn't flinch. He had been knocked down before, by life, by war, by his own mistakes. But this time he wasn't going to let it break him. "I'm not going anywhere," Silas said, his voice low but powerful. "And neither is this project." A tense silence filled the room, thick with the promise of what was to come. Julian stood, the disdain in his eyes unmistakable. "Then we'll see, Silas. We'll see who gets to decide the future of this company." As Julian walked out of the room, leaving the two men with the weight of their decisions, Silas's breathing grew shallow, his chest tightening. Jack glanced at him, concern creeping into his eyes, but Silas gave him a small nod. "We'll fight, Jack. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about everything we stand for." The hours after Julian's departure were heavy with silence. Silas and Jack remained in the boardroom, the tension still hanging in the air, but the sense of urgency had shifted. Julian had thrown down the gauntlet, and now the real fight was just beginning. Silas could feel the weight of his decisions settling on his shoulders, but there was something else, something deeper, that stirred within him. As he wheeled himself to the window, Thor followed closely behind, his paws barely making a sound on the polished floor. The dog had been quiet, his amber eyes fixed on Silas, as if waiting for a signal. He knew this was more than just a corporate battle. This was about honor, loyalty, and the strength to stand up for what was right, even when the world seemed to be crumbling around them. Silas looked down at Thor, who had positioned himself beside the wheelchair, standing guard. The dog's presence was more than just a comfort. It was a constant reminder of what truly mattered. Thor had been by his side through everything. The wars, the losses, the mistakes. The dog had never wavered. His loyalty was unwavering. His love unconditional. Jack watched the interaction, seeing the quiet strength between the two. He had seen Silas's resolve before, but now, with Thor standing beside him, it felt different. There was a bond between them that went beyond words, beyond business. Thor was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of something deeper, a connection that could not be broken, no matter the storm that raged outside. "Thor has been with me longer than anyone," Silas said softly, his voice low but filled with meaning. "Through everything, he's been my constant. And it's not just because he's a dog, it's because he chose to stay. He chose to fight with me." Jack nodded, understanding the weight of Silas's words. He had always known that loyalty ran deep in the military. But here, in this moment, it meant more than just following orders. It was about something much more personal, something that transcended duty. "The loyalty Thor has shown me. It's not just about what I need. It's about what I can give." Silas continued, his voice growing steadier. "I've spent so many years trying to build something, trying to prove myself, but I've neglected the one thing that truly matters, the people around me. I've been so focused on what I could gain that I forgot what it means to give, to truly give." Jack didn't interrupt. He simply let Silas speak, knowing that these were the kinds of realizations that would change the course of their fight. "I've let people down," Silas said, looking down at Thor once again, the weight of his past mistakes hanging in the air. "But maybe now, with Thor by my side, I can do things differently. I can show loyalty not just as something to be received, but something to be given." Thor sat at Silas's feet, his large body still and silent, his eyes never leaving his master's face. The bond between them was undeniable, a force that even the harshest of corporate battles could not break. Silas reached down, his hand trembling slightly as he stroked Thor's head. "I've been searching for redemption all my life. Maybe it starts here, with the people who have stood by me, and with the trust I'm willing to give in return." In that quiet moment, as Thor leaned into Silas's touch, Jack understood something important. Silas wasn't just fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for his redemption, for the chance to be the man he had always wanted to be, not just the powerful businessman. And Thor, This dog who had been with him through it all was a reminder of that. Jack felt a renewed sense of determination. They would fight together. They would face Julian, and they would fight for the people who mattered. The battle for the shelter wasn't just a fight for veterans, it was a fight for something bigger, the chance to rebuild trust, to rebuild connections. The boardroom was tense. Silas had never felt the weight of a decision more than he did in that moment. The fight against Julian had been long and exhausting, and the battle for control of the company had pushed him to his limits. His body, already frail, seemed to struggle against the physical toll, but his spirit remained unbroken. He could feel the eyes of the board members on him, their expectations, their doubts, all pressing in on him. He had spent years building this company, but it was never just about the money. It had been about power, about legacy, about proving himself. Yet now, for the first time, Silas knew that what mattered most was not the empire he had built, but the people who had stood by him. Jack had reminded him of that, and so had Thor. Silas stood up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his legs, but his resolve was unwavering. Jack was by his side, a silent strength, and Thor sat quietly at his feet, as if to remind him that the fight ahead was worth it. As he stepped forward, the room seemed to hold its breath. He was about to do what he had promised himself he would never do, confront the man who had been so determined to take it all away. "Gentlemen," Silas began, his voice clear and firm despite the weakness in his body. "For too long I've let ambition blind me to what truly matters. This company, this empire, it was built on the backs of those who believed in me. But it's become clear to me now that power alone isn't enough. Not when it costs you everything you care about." He looked directly at Julian, whose expression was as smug as ever, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "I've watched you, Julian," Silas continued, his voice gaining strength. "I've watched you manipulate, lie, and steal from the very people who trusted you. But today I'm done. You've lost your way. This company is not yours to control anymore." The room was silent, the weight of Silas's words hanging heavy. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but Silas raised a hand, silencing him. "Effective immediately," Silas declared, his voice ringing with finality. "I'm stepping down, but I'm not stepping away. Jack Sterling will take over as CEO, and I trust him to lead this company into a future where we can rebuild what's been broken." There was a collective gasp from the board members. Julian stood up, his face turning red with fury. "You can't be serious," he spat. "You're giving up everything. You're handing the reins over to him, a former soldier with no business experience. This company will fall apart." Silas's eyes never left Julian. "The company has already fallen apart, Julian. You've done enough damage. It's time for someone with integrity, someone who understands the value of loyalty and sacrifice to take control." Jack stepped forward, his heart racing, but his mind clear. This was his moment. This was what he had been fighting for. Silas had chosen him, not just because of his skills, but because of his belief in something greater than profit. "I won't let you down, Silas," Jack said, his voice steady. "We'll rebuild, together." As Julian stood there, speechless with anger, Silas turned to him one last time. "I suggest you pack your things, Julian. You're done here. You're no longer welcome in this company." The tension in the room was palpable, but there was an undeniable sense of triumph in the air. Julian turned and stormed out, his plans crumbling around him. As the door slammed behind him, Silas looked at Jack, a smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The company was no longer a prison. It was a chance to rebuild, to create something better. "We did it," Silas said, his voice soft with relief. Jack nodded. "We did it together." The air in the room was charged with a quiet sense of victory. The months of struggle, the late nights, the pressure, and the endless battles had finally led to this moment. Silas, Jack, and Thor stood side by side, ready to celebrate the beginning of something new. Something that had the power to change the lives of many veterans and unknowingly their own as well. It was a cold winter evening, the night of the grand opening ceremony, for the veterans' shelter. The place, which had once been nothing more than an abandoned warehouse, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space. It was no longer a structure of rusting metal and broken windows. It was a home for those who had given everything and now had nothing but memories and scars. The shelter was bustling with energy, filled with veterans, their families, and supporters who had come to see the culmination of what Silas, Jack, and the rest of the team had worked so tirelessly for. The smell of food wafted through the air, and the sound of laughter and conversations filled the space. The shelter was alive with the warmth of people coming together, and for once it felt like something real had been built. Silas stood at the front of the room, a rare smile playing on his lips. His health had been a constant worry, and the toll of the past had left him exhausted, but tonight he seemed to stand a little taller. He had done something important, something that meant more than profits or power. He had built a place where people could heal, where veterans could find hope. Jack stood beside him, looking around the room at the faces that were filled with gratitude and joy. He could feel a sense of purpose in the air, something that had been missing from his life for so long. The shelter wasn't just a building. It was a second chance for everyone who walked through its doors. And it was his second chance, too. As Thor stood at his feet, Jack ran his hand over the dog's fur, feeling the weight of the journey they had all been on. Thor, ever the silent companion, had been the constant reminder that loyalty, love, and purpose were the true foundations of strength. The dog had been with Jack through everything, through the darkest days and the moments of triumph. For Jack, this night wasn't just about the project. It was about the family he had found again. It was about the connection he had forged with Silas, the bond that had started in a corporate boardroom and had grown into something much deeper. Thor, too, had brought them together, reminding them that the most important things in life weren't about money or success, but about the people you choose to stand beside. As the ceremony began, Silas took the microphone, his voice steady and clear. This project, this shelter, is not just about providing a roof over someone's head. It's about giving them back their dignity. It's about giving them a chance to heal, to rebuild their lives. And it's because of all of you, those who believed in this dream, that we're standing here today. The room erupted in applause, and Jack couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just Silas's words that made the moment special, it was the truth behind them. They had built something that mattered, something that would change lives. It was a testament to what loyalty, perseverance, and a willingness to fight for what was right could accomplish. As the applause died down, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Silas, his face softer than it had ever been. "This is just the beginning, Jack," he said. "We've created something, but we've only scratched the surface. There's still so much to do." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also the excitement of the future. "We'll keep going, Silas. We'll make sure this place stays strong, and we'll continue helping the men and women who fought for us." And then, as if on cue, Thor gave a small bark, a soft but proud sound that seemed to echo the sentiment in the room. The dog was, after all, a symbol of their journey. Thor had been the silent hero in this story, reminding them that sometimes the smallest gestures, like loyalty, like love, could create the biggest impact. Jack looked at Silas and then down at Thor, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he truly belonged. The shelter, the project, the journey, it wasn't just about fighting for a cause, it was about finding his place, finding family, and finding hope in a world that often felt broken. As the days passed after the grand opening, Jack found himself increasingly immersed in the work of the shelter. But the project had become more than just a professional endeavor. It had become a place of healing, of connection, and for Jack, a place where he could finally feel like he belonged. The sense of acceptance he had once longed for was now present, and it came not only from Silas, but from Emily and the community they were building together. As Jack spent more time with Silas and Emily, he began to realize that the healing process went beyond helping the veterans. It was about healing themselves, too. There were moments when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear, but then Thor would nudge him gently as if to remind him that he was not alone. The dog, always by his side, had become the silent but steadfast reminder of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. Thor had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered, no matter what their past was, no matter how broken they felt. The dog's presence alone could fill a room with warmth, his eyes full of understanding and his heart full of unconditional love. One afternoon, Emily invited Jack over for dinner. It had been a few months since their initial phone call, and they were still working through the complexities of their relationship, but Jack could feel the connection growing stronger. As they sat at the dinner table, Emily shared stories about her life, the years she had spent away from Silas, and the challenges she had faced growing up. Jack could see the walls she had built, walls that had been formed out of years of neglect and pain, but he also saw the cracks, small but present. Emily was opening up, and so was Jack. They were both finding their way toward something they had lost long ago: family. After dinner, Emily turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "I know I wasn't easy to get to know," she said quietly, "but I'm glad we're starting to rebuild this. I'm glad you're here, Jack." The sincerity in her words touched him deeply. He had spent so long believing he didn't have a place in the world, thinking that the loss of his family meant he would never have one again. But now, with Silas, Emily, and the veterans they were helping, Jack was starting to understand what real family meant. It wasn't just blood. It was the people who chose to stand by you, to accept you, and to fight for something greater than themselves. Thor, ever the quiet observer, lay next to Silas on the couch, his head resting gently on his paws. The dog had become an integral part of their journey, a symbol of the sacrifices made, the love shared, and the bonds that held them all together. As the evening came to a close, Emily turned to Thor with a gentle laugh. "You know," she said, scratching the dog behind his ears, "I don't think I'll ever be able to fully understand how one dog can change so many lives. But somehow, Thor has made all the difference." Jack looked down at Thor, his chest swelling with emotion. Thor wasn't just a dog, he was the bridge that connected the broken pieces of their lives, the link that had brought Jack, Silas, and Emily together. Through Thor, they had found their way back to each other, and through their shared experiences, they were learning to love and accept again. As Silas looked on, his eyes soft with pride, he placed his hand on Jack's shoulder. This is what it's all about, Jack. Family, loyalty, love. We've built something real here. And with Thor by our side, there's nothing we can't face." The next few weeks felt like a slow but steady rebuilding of what had once been broken. Emily and Silas began to find their way back to each other, starting with simple conversations. They shared meals together, stories of the years lost, and tentative apologies that, though soft, were sincere. The process was slow, but each step forward brought them closer. For Emily, it wasn't just about mending the rift between father and daughter. It was about rediscovering the love she had always longed for but felt had been denied. Silas had always been distant, too absorbed in his empire, but now, with the weight of his mistakes heavy on his shoulders, he was determined to rebuild not just his business, but his family. One evening, as they sat around the table together sharing a quiet meal, Emily turned to Silas, her voice softer than it had been in years. "I never really understood why you kept pushing me away, why you didn't see that I needed you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "But now, I see you're trying, and that means more than I can say." Silas looked at her, his heart heavy with guilt. "I was a fool, Emily. I thought I was doing the right thing by focusing on work, on the company. But in doing so, I pushed away the only person who truly mattered. I lost you, and I can never take that back." Emily's lips trembled slightly, but she nodded, her eyes softening. "We can't change the past, but we can make a new future. I want to be part of that future, Dad. I'm willing to try, for both of us." And so they began to build their relationship anew, one small moment at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were still unspoken words, memories that would take time to heal, But for the first time in a long time, Silas felt like he had something to fight for: his daughter, his family, and a chance at redemption. Through all of this, Thor remained a constant. The dog had always been more than just a companion to Silas. He had been a silent witness to the years of pain, but also the bridge between the past and the present. Thor's unwavering loyalty and his quiet presence had helped heal wounds that no amount of time or words could. His role in their journey was undeniable. When Emily saw the bond between Thor and Silas, she couldn't help but smile. It was as if the dog had been the one thing that kept them all together, a symbol of loyalty and love that transcended words. Thor wasn't just a dog, he was a spiritual companion, reminding them all of the importance of being there for one another no matter the cost. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Silas looked out over the land they were working to transform. The project was progressing, but more than that, it was beginning to take on a new significance. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a home for veterans, a place where people who had been broken could rebuild their lives. And for Silas, it had become a symbol of the healing he had found within his family. Emily sat beside him, her head resting gently on his shoulder, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. "I never imagined we'd be here," she said, her voice soft. "It feels like we're starting over, like everything is new." Silas smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. "Maybe we are, Emily. Maybe we are." As Thor lay at their feet, his eyes closed in contentment, Silas realized something. Family, loyalty, and love were the foundations of everything that mattered. It was no longer about wealth or status, it was about the people around him, the ones who had stayed and the ones who had come back. The days seemed to blur together as the project for the veterans' shelter took shape. Jack and Silas worked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The shelter, once an abandoned structure, now stood as a symbol of what they had accomplished together. It wasn't just a place for the veterans to stay, it was a sanctuary, a place where they could rebuild their lives, find hope, and regain a sense of purpose. Every brick they laid down, every nail they hammered into place carried the weight of their commitment. For Jack, this project had become more than just a job. It had become a mission, one that gave him a sense of belonging he had never known before. The people they were helping, men and women who had fought for their country, were now depending on them to provide a new beginning, a chance at healing. Silas, too, found himself reinvigorated. The physical toll of the years was still present, and his body was weakening with age and illness, but his spirit had found new life in this work. His focus had shifted. The company he had once built was no longer the center of his world. The shelter was now his focus, and every step forward felt like redemption. The project had not only become a way to give back to those who had fought for freedom, but had also given him the chance to heal his own brokenness. As they worked, Thor was never far behind. The dog, as always, was a constant presence, ever loyal, ever watchful. Thor had become more than just a companion. He was the thread that connected them all. His calm demeanor, his ability to sense when they were struggling, when they needed a moment of peace, had been invaluable. Jack and Silas both knew that without Thor, the journey would have been much harder. The dog was a reminder that even in the most challenging times, they were not alone. One evening, as the sun set over the land they had transformed, Silas and Jack stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the shelter that was finally taking shape. The building was no longer just an idea. It was real, and it was becoming a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. "I can't believe how far we've come," Silas said, his voice tinged with awe. "When I first started this, I didn't know if I'd ever see the day we'd actually finish it. But here we are. This place, it's going to change lives." Jack nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "It's not just the building that's changing lives. It's the people who've come together to make this happen. We've got a real community here, and we're giving people a chance to rebuild, just like we did." Thor let out a low bark, as if in agreement. He stood beside them, his fur rustling in the evening breeze, his amber eyes fixed on the shelter. There was something in his gaze, something that spoke of his understanding of what this place represented. Thor had been with them from the very beginning, and now, more than ever, he was a part of something greater. As the evening sky turned a deep shade of purple, Jack turned to Silas. "This is just the beginning, Silas. We've built something here, but there's so much more to do. We can't stop now." Silas smiled, his eyes gleaming with quiet pride. "You're right, Jack. The work's never done. But with you by my side, with Thor by our side, I know we'll keep going. We'll make sure this place stands for as long as it's needed." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound being the soft wind and the distant hum of life. The shelter was alive now, and so were they. They had built something real, a place where veterans could find healing, a place where Jack and Silas had found a renewed sense of purpose. And with Thor leading the way, they knew that no matter what came next, they were ready to face it together. As the days passed, the shelter flourished. The sound of laughter, the hum of construction, and the constant footsteps of people moving forward filled the air. It was a place of growth, of second chances, and of rebuilding not just walls, but lives. Silas, Jack, and Thor had come a long way from the uncertain days when they first dreamed of this project. Now it was alive with purpose. Each morning Thor was there, standing guard beside Silas as they worked through the plans for the shelter's next phase. The dog's presence was a steady reminder of what they had achieved and what they were still fighting for. Thor had seen them through the toughest of times, never wavering in his loyalty and love. In the quiet moments when Silas felt the weight of his body's limitations, Thor would nudge his hand, grounding him with the pure, unconditional connection they shared. It was as if the dog knew that despite the struggles they faced, there was a greater purpose in their work. Silas and Jack found themselves growing closer, not just as partners in the project, but as friends, as men who had seen the worst of life and had come out on the other side with a deeper appreciation for what truly mattered. They both knew that their battle was far from over, but they had something now that neither of them had before: a sense of belonging, a sense of family. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the shelter, Silas turned to Jack, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I never imagined I'd be here," Silas said, his voice tinged with emotion. "I thought I'd spent my whole life chasing something that didn't matter. But this means something. This is worth everything I've been through." Jack smiled, his heart full. "I used to think the same thing. I thought I had nothing left to give, nothing left to live for. But now, I've got a family again. Not just the veterans we're helping, but you, Silas, and Thor." Thor, ever the loyal companion, lay at their feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. It was as if he understood that in this moment, everything was as it should be. He had been a part of their journey from the beginning, and now, more than ever, he was a symbol of the sacrifice and loyalty that defined their mission. As the sky grew darker, Silas reached down to scratch Thor's ears, his fingers gentle against the dog's fur. "I never thought I'd have this peace again," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was too far gone, but somehow we've found our way back, and it's because of you, Thor." The dog let out a soft sigh, his tail thumping quietly against the floor, as if acknowledging Silas's words. Thor had always been there, through the storms, the pain, and the loss. He had been the one constant in their lives, the one unwavering presence that had kept them grounded no matter how difficult the journey had been. Jack leaned back in his chair, gazing at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. There was something about the stillness of the night, the quiet hum of life around them, that filled him with hope. It wasn't just about the shelter anymore. It was about the future they were building together, the family they had created through loyalty, sacrifice, and love. "Tomorrow is another day," Jack said quietly, a smile spreading across his face. "Another day to keep building, to keep fighting. But this time we're not alone. We've got each other, and we've got Thor." Silas smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yes, we do. We've got each other, And for the first time in a long time, I believe we can face whatever comes next. As the night settled around them, Thor rested his head on Silas's lap, his eyes closed in peaceful contentment. The future, though uncertain, felt full of promise. Together, they had found redemption, and with each other, they would continue to build something that mattered, not just for the veterans, but for themselves. And as Thor slept soundly at their feet, the promise of loyalty, love, and family felt more real than ever before. In a world that often feels divided, the story of Silas, Jack, and Thor reminds us of the profound power of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. Thor, the German shepherd, serves as more than just a companion. He is the living embodiment of unconditional love, a symbol of the deep bond that can exist between humans and animals. His loyalty to Silas and Jack transcends words, proving that animals have a unique ability to heal and bring people together in ways that go beyond the capacity of many human relationships. Through Thor, we are reminded that love isn't always about grand gestures. It's about showing up, staying present, and being there when it matters most. Just as Thor stood by Silas through the toughest battles, he also helped Jack rediscover his purpose and connection to others. In doing so, the dog has not only impacted their lives, but has also helped create a legacy of kindness, compassion, and second chances. This story teaches us that no matter how broken we may feel, there is always room for healing. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. The love and trust shared between a person and their pet can provide the foundation for rebuilding lives and finding a new sense of meaning. Thor's role in this journey is a testament to the incredible value animals bring to our lives, and how their presence can inspire us to become better versions of ourselves. In the end, the message is clear. Love, loyalty, and the willingness to fight for those who matter most are the true pillars of a life well lived.